All right. Well, some folks have been asking how to diagnose the compressor for the air ride for the GM SUV type vehicles like the Cadillac Escalade, like I have a 2008, and it has this compressor on it. This is a spare that I have. You know, my system's working. But I brought it out here to kind of go through how to check and see if this compressor's bad, because the suspension is real easy. These airbags go bad. This one is okay. It's an old one. But normally you'll see something physically wrong with these. But for the compressor, you don't really know if it's working or not just because the airbags are blown. Now, odds are, if the airbags are blown and the compressor's having to cycle, it's probably burned itself out. But before we go through and check on how to physically check this little compressor to see if it's working, we need to understand how the system works, because it might be something else. Could be a fuse, could be a relay, could be something else. So we'll zoom in on this little board up here and we'll see just kind of a basic of how this system works. All right, so in looking at just kind of a schematic, basic schematic of how the system works, it looks kind of complicated, but it actually isn't. There's not too much going on with this thing. It just has a suspension controller, so that's kind of like the brains of the thing. It's got a level sensor that's on the back axle to tell the suspension controller if it's too high or too low. You know, if you put weight on it, it'll load it down. If you take weight off, it'll raise it up. It needs to know that. And you have a compressor, which is our little unit that we're wondering if it's good or not. And in purple there is everything that's part of that compressor. So it has a pressure switch that determines whether or not it has too much pressure or not enough pressure, tells it when to cut on and off if the conditions are met. It also has a vent valve, because if it's too high when you take load off, you got to get the air back out. So it's got a little vent valve that vents it out. Of course, you got the air shock. And then you got a relay that drives the whole thing. But the first thing we want to do before we go to taking the compressor off is actually check the fuses and check the relay to make sure those are working. There are several fuses that run this whole system. You can see this fuse 58 on mine, and you'll see them if you take your cover off of your fuse panel. And this is the one in the motor. Take that off, you'll see the little numbers in there. So for my 2008 Escalade, these are my fuse numbers. It'll be different for the different vehicles, like a Tahoe or something like that. You're going to have to look up your schematics. But all of this works about the same. The fuse numbers may be a little bit different. But you can see that fuse 58 takes 12 volts down to the coil. Now the coil is the controlling part of the relay. It's what, when it energizes it, it's what latches down the big power wire. So this is like a 40 amp fuse on this one, fuse 54. Fuse 58 is much smaller because all it's doing is pulling the coil down. So the way that works is you get your power to your coil, and then the controller, when it tells it, when all the conditions are met, it tells it to pull that coil down. Well, that coil pulls that latch, and then 54 is my big fuse. If that fuse is good, it'll power up the compressor. But in order to power up the compressor, a lot of things have to be made. So for the level sensor, in order for the compressor to come on, the controller needs to know that the level is down. So you've put load on the vehicle, so it knows, okay, I got to turn the compressor on to get the vehicle to come back up. If the level is too high, the suspension controller doesn't turn on the compressor, it actually turns on the vent valve. And so it'll tell it to vent it off. So it vents the air supply when it's too high. But we got to have the level sensor down, so it's got to indicate that it needs to have the compressor on. The pressure switch needs to be below the spec on what the max pressure is, because it's not going to keep pumping if it gets to a certain pressure. Let's say you put a really heavy trailer on it and it just can't pump the suspension up. It's not going to keep trying forever. It'll get to a point when it reaches the max pressure, it'll just turn off. It says that's all I'm going to do. So that condition has to be met. The level sensor has to be met, and then also you have to have no suspension errors, and the one that's really not shown on here but the vehicle does it for you is it's got to make sure that it has at least 12 volts or 12 point something volts in order to turn the compressor on, because it doesn't want to waste your battery. If your battery is a little bit low and it's going to be enough to start the vehicle but maybe not enough to start it if the compressor's on, it's not going to waste your battery turning the compressor on unless that voltage is high enough. So this is why sometimes when you just turn the key on and you're not running the motor, you don't hear the compressor come on. It's because your battery is a little bit low. Once you start the vehicle, it starts charging the battery, and then the compressor will cut on. So let's go through this relay a little bit. We talked about the fuses. So you got a fuse that runs a vent valve, a fuse that is the main big fuse that runs the compressor. You also have a fuse that runs this coil. So that's pretty much the fuses. There's a fuse to the suspension controller as well. But what about this relay? So let's talk a little bit about these numbers that I got on here and what that relay is doing, because we're going to look at that relay and take it off and put it on the bench, energize it, and just make sure the relay is working. All right, so just what are these little numbers that I put on here on this relay? Well, if you take any standard relay, and most industry standard, they keep these numbers the same. So here's an example of a little relay. I don't know if you can see the numbers on it or not. I can hold it up in the light right. But you can see on that little relay, it's got the same numbers as the relay that's on our vehicle. And so even on this one, you can see that the coil is 86 and 85. And then the input to the main, that's what the relay is driving, is 30. And then it toggles back and forth between 87 and 87.8. So that's what these little numbers are on here. When we look at our relay on the vehicle, it's going to have these same numbers. They're awfully hard to see on it, but they're actually on there. We're going to look at that and see if I can get a camera angle down in there so you can see the little numbers on them. But that's what those are for, because when I take it over to the bench, I'm going to want to energize 85 and 86 with a 12-volt supply. And then I'm going to check and make sure that 30 and 87 actually contact. So that's what those little numbers are about right there. All right, so enough of a schematic. Let's head over to the vehicle, and we're going to look at each of these little pieces and see what we can check. All right, so now we're over here to the Escalade. So let's zoom in here and we can see what's going on and where this stuff is. So underneath here is our fuse box. So this is our cover that's got our descriptions and everything on it. So if we're looking at the fuses, what I was looking at is fuse 2, and so it's called, I'll put it up on the screen, ESC-ALC. So what we're looking for is the ones that are ALC, because number 2 is that one. And then we're looking at number 54, which says it's SEOALC. And then the big one that runs the compressor is actually one of these guys right here that has the little clear tops. And it is number 58, which says ALCCOMP. So that's the compressor. So there's our fuses, and we can check each one of those. We can pull them out and check them, or that one you can just look at to see if the fuse is bad or not. But we're looking for the relay as well. So where is this relay hiding? Well, they put it right here. So if you can see right here, this is the relay, big old armor on relay for the compressor. And so the suspension controller tells this relay to cut on and off, and that's what runs that compressor. So he's our main thing that we want to look at, but we also want to check these fuses. So to get the fuses out, of course I don't have the ignition on or anything. I can pull the fuses, and these guys are kind of tough to get out. You actually have to wiggle on them a little bit and pry on them a little bit, and the big ones don't want to come out very good at all. But eventually you can wiggle them and they'll come out, and it's just a little fuse. So we can check the fuse, you can look at it and see if it's blown or not, but you can also take a meter. So if you have a multimeter, you can also probe it and just check and make sure this guy has continuity. So I just got it set on continuity. So when I touch these together, it beeps. So I can just put one in there and one in there. And so that tells me that the compressor fuse, the big 40 amp fuse, it's good. So I don't have an issue. So I'll put him back in there. Same thing for number 2. It's sitting right there. So that one you can get out. You can look at the side of it, make sure it's not blown, or you can put a meter on it, make sure that it's working. And then the last one that we have is right back here at number 54. It's right by the pump, so right there. That one's a little tough to get to, so you can take a pair of pliers and get a hold of him, pull him out of there. and just check him to make sure that he's good. So he's good as well. I'll just put a meter on him just to verify. So we just cross over right there so we can see he's good. So we can put him back in. So that's how you would verify your fuses to make sure the fuses are good. You look up the ones that say ALC. Apparently that's for the suspension control. All right, so what about this relay down in here? So let me zoom in a little bit closer and we'll see about pulling that relay out. We'll take it over to the bench and then we'll check it. All right, so to get this relay out to check it, it's actually quite complicated to get off there. It's got a little pusher, you have to push it, but if you push it, it don't want to come off. So you don't want to push it and pull against the wires. So what you need is to get a screwdriver and put it right in the groove there and then push on the little connector and you can wiggle it and get that thing to come loose. And so what we're going to do is take this relay over here to the bench and we're going to check it. So once you get it opened up, then you pull him loose and you can see the connector right there. These are the 4 connections that come up here and go over to the controller. But there is our relay. And what we want to do is check that thing. So let's go over to the bench. I'll put some marks on it to indicate what's what, and then we'll see how to check this thing. All right, so back over to the bench to check our little relay that we just took off. And if you look down inside of there, it'll be impossible to see it on the camera. But if you look at the 4 poles that are in there, each one of them has a number beside it. And that corresponds to the 30, 87, 85, and 86. So you'll have to shine a light down in your relay and see which one is which. And so I can see right here, this is the 30. And so I've marked it with white. So I know that that 30, that's the input going to the compressor. And then over here, opposite to it, down in this corner is the one that goes to the compressor. Then these 2 here are the coils. So this one and this one are the coil wires. So what I want to do to check the relay is I want to put voltage across the coil and then I want to check and make sure that these contact. So what you need to do is have your little relay, but you also have to get a little power supply or something, or a battery. If you got a battery, extra battery, something like that, you can energize this thing. It doesn't really take 12 volts exactly. Probably do it with a 9-volt battery. But what we got to do is hook up some wires here and we're going to check this little relay just like our picture up there, and then we're going to see if this relay is working. Like that right there. All right, so if the relay is working, when I plug my little power supply in, my multimeter ought to go beep, and then I'll know that that relay is locking in. So let me come over here. All I do is just plug it in for a second and we should hear that beep. You also should hear that relay go pop. So you can hear it go tick. So that shows that the relay is good. If when you wire it up using the little numbers inside the relay, if you wire it up and you don't get a beep on your meter or you don't hear that relay ticking down, then you'll know that your relay is bad. You can replace that relay and it might fix your problem. But in our case, our relay is good because we just verified it, and so now we can put it back in the vehicle. We've already checked our fuses, so we know those are good. So now at this point, with the fuses good, the relay good, we're going to need to pull the compressor off the vehicle and we're going to check the compressor. So let's go put our relay back on, and then what I'll do is just show a quick video of how to take the compressor off, and then we'll come back over to the bench once we got that video. So right there sits the compressor, easy access from here, so there's really no reason at all to lift this vehicle up. You can access the 3 little bolts that hold it on there, but I'm going to lift it up in order to get a video camera underneath there so we can see how to take it loose and see where those bolts are in the back. I'm just lifting it up so I can show you this hole where this nut goes right here, up inside of there. And so if I pan upward, up underneath right by the spare tire and right up to the frame, then right over in the corner, right there, where my finger's pointing, is a hole. And so that little hole right there has the nut inside of it for that third one. So while I'm down here, I might as well go ahead and break that free. So the nut size is a 13 millimeter, and what you want is a deep well socket, because a shallow one, if you use an extension, you're liable to rake it off inside of the frame, and then you'll forever have a 13 millimeter rattling around inside your frame there. So that works better with a deep well. And so all we want to do is put them up in the hole, and like I say, we don't have to actually take the nut loose. All we got to do is loosen it up. That's all I'm going to do is just loosen it up enough that I can slide the compressor. So there we go. So that ought to be loose enough. And my socket came back out, so I'm good. Alright, so let's spin around here and get the other two loosened up, and then we'll take the connectors off. Okay, so now we're looking toward the front of the vehicle from the back. And so if I pan up here, you'll see the back of the compressor, and there's the other two nuts that have to be loosened up. They don't have to be taken off, just loosened up. So we can go ahead and loosen them up. Alright, so those are loosened up. The whole unit is ready to go. So now we just need to go up there and disconnect some electrical. Alright, so all we need to do, since we got the bolts loosened up already, is we need to disconnect the air going to the compressor. And we got to get this little fitting group right here off of the side of the body, and the electrical connector, and then that's that little pipe that we were talking about on the bench. We got to get that disconnected to attach to the new one. So we'll start by getting this little guy off, and all you got to do is pinch him and get the little tabs to go inside the hole, and he'll come right off there. We just pinch around on him like that. So he's free. Alright, so then to get the hose off, you just take the clamp and tip it sideways. So just spin it around sideways so it opens up, and then you're just gonna pull that loose and disconnect it like that right there. So that's ready to go. You can clip the clamp back down. So that's got our plumbing, and now all we need to do is disconnect the electrical. So that's a little pinch type, so you just have to pinch it and pull it loose. Just get in there and pinch it. Right there. So that's got our electrical freed up. There's our connectors. And then the last on the list is the little hose here. And so we just need to disconnect that. And you'll see that it actually goes all the way up, and it comes up here on top of the vehicle where you put fuel in. And so that's the little guy we got to reconnect. So we got everything disconnected. We got all of our lines out of the way. So we'll just get them up out of the way a little bit. You could disconnect this if you wanted to this shock, and just move all that harness out of the way. So now all we got to do is scoot it backward and upward a little bit, and it'll come right out of it. So let me grab it and see if we can tug it out of it. We might have to take a screwdriver and loosen it up just a little bit, but we'll see. And there you go. So you can see how those little bolts work. They're just pinched down in there, so you have to pull them back a little bit. But you can see the slot, so all you do is just go up sideways, and you can pull that right off there. Alright, so assuming we have checked our relay, and it was good, and we've checked all of our fuses, and they were good. Now, we've pulled the compressor off, and we got it on the bench, so we're going to check the compressor. So over here we had the pressure switch. Now that's up on top on the compressor right here. And so we can't really check that one because we don't have a way of knowing what its inputs and outputs are. So it could be bad and make the compressor not run. But we can direct wire the compressor and see if the little compressor will pump by using the same, either a battery or using a little charger like we got. So let's get tilted down here and we'll see what we got going on with this compressor. Alright, so here we got our compressor, and here's our connection that goes to this one. It varies a little bit from compressor to compressor. I think some of them are round. But what we're looking for is the two biggest wires. And so here's a big red one and a big black one. You can also trace them down. They actually go to the motor. So the motor is down here running the compressor. This is your pressure sensor, and then there's also the little vent valve that's underneath the back. So you want to chase these wires down and make sure you're going to the motor right here, but it's these two big ones. So all we're going to do is hook up, and it's DC, so the polarity is not so super important, but it'd be nice to get the red one being positive and the black one being the negative. So I'm going to hook it up that way, and I'm just going to bump it for a second and just hear the compressor run whether or not. Now keep in mind, this is a good compressor, so what you hear ought to be what your compressor does if it's good. And if the little motor pumps and the compressor's still not working, then it may be this pressure switch. The vent valve is not going to keep the compressor from working on the vehicle. All it's going to do is keep it from building any kind of pressure if the vent valve's gone bad. But you should still hear on the car, if all the conditions are made, no errors, you got 12 volts plus, you know, you're on your low level on your level sensor, and your pressure's working, then all of that should make that compressor cut on. So all we're going to do is hook up a couple of little wires again. So I'm just going to use red for red. So I'm looking for that big red one where he comes in, and that's going to be to the pump. And then I'm looking for the big black one where he comes in, and so he's the third one over up on top up here. And so we're just going to connect up those right there. Now we got something we can hook to. So I'm going to hook my positive from my little jumper to that one, and I'm going to hook my negative to that one, and then I'm going to plug my little battery charger in and see if that little pump works. So all we're going to do is plug our little battery charger in. We're set on 12 volt 6 amp, and you should hear that compressor cycle for a second. I'm not going to leave it running. I just want to check and make sure that it pumps. So here we go. So you can see it actually wiggle when it pumps, and it's making pressure, because right here would be the pressure coming out right there. So we're in good shape. So that would be how you could check and make sure if you took the compressor off the vehicle. You just have to hook it up and check it. Now we can't check this one because we don't know what the inputs and outputs are on the pressure switch, but we can check the little pump. So my pump's working, so theoretically this compressor would be good if everything else was okay. So if it's not working on the vehicle, but you can get it to pump right here, and you don't have any of those other conditions, then you may have to check some wiring. You may have to check your level sensor on your rear axle to make sure that it's getting the conditions as well. But that'd be how to check your little compressor once you get it off. And then if you find it's not pumping, then you'll know you'll have to replace it out. Well, alrighty. Well, thanks for watching.